Good afternoon. I'm Lauren Law of Chosen to Speak Up. We're an organization that's devoted to stopping anti-Semitism. Today, I have a very special guest on my show. But before I introduce her, I'd like to say that if you'd like to reach out to us, our email address is chosen@phillaw.net. That's chosen at PHILLAW.net. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Adrienne Skolnik. Adrienne Skolnik is on the National Advisory Committee and chairman of the North Carolina chapter of the Conference of Jewish Affairs. She is a retired commercial real estate broker and entrepreneur now living in North Carolina. Ms. Skolnik is a concerned Jewish conservative and has articles published in the American Thinker and The Forward, both online international magazines. She's an active community leader. While living in Florida, she was the founder and president of the Gulf Coast Rowing Association, created a water safety program, and developed high school and senior rowing programs. Ms. Skolnik served on the National Advisory Board of the Adam Walsh Center for Missing Children, which became part of the Justice Department, and is now the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She was chairman of 2 fundraising events, Celebration of Life, Row and Run for Breast Cancer. In North Carolina, she participates in Cook for Vets, helping prepare and serve meals for homeless veterans, and Room at the Inn, cooking meals for homeless women. Tonight, Adrienne will be speaking of her research, The New Jewish Exodus. Adrienne, please tell us what you know.
Welcome to the New Jewish Exodus Project. I'd like to thank Lauren Law for this wonderful opportunity to present this unique event. Also, our 2 co-sponsors, Charles Jacobs, President of Americans for Peace and Tolerance, and Alex Koifman, President of the Russian Jewish Community Organization. And a special thank you to Ben Poser, Alex Koifman, and Julia Schmidt for helping us with our recording and pictures. I'd like to start by describing the destruction of the Second Temple. Aside from the troubles caused by external powers, the Jews were also plagued internally by tumultuous politics, needless hatred, were divided into factions and fought amongst themselves, a phenomenon that ultimately led to the temple's destruction, our nation's torturous exile, and to Roman rule. Such strife tore apart Jewish cohesiveness, which, if it had existed, would have successfully resisted Roman infiltration into all areas of life. A frightening description of history repeating itself today. How did radical movements take over our institutions so quickly? It didn't happen overnight. It developed slowly, so subtly, people didn't even realize what was happening. As Rabbi Aryeh Spero has taught, the Frankfurt School began in the 1930s, when many German Jewish communists were granted entry into America prior to World War II. They repaid our country by indoctrinating a whole generation, mostly Jews, in communist, hate America, intellectual toxicity that continues to this day. They are the reason most Jewish educators and rabbis continue to be schooled in this love of socialism, communism they branded tikkun olam. They taught at the new school in Greenwich Village, which gave birth to the American-hating Howard Zinn, whose communist ideologies now infiltrate our schools, brainwashing our younger generations. our synagogues became Marxist, anti-white, self-hating indoctrination centers and are no longer places of authentic religious worship of Judaism. They disdain America and want to transform it. They think they are morally superior and should run everything. Their Torah is multicultural liberalism. And as universalists, they will sacrifice Judaism and Israel and worship on the altar of left liberalism. They will also sacrifice for the causes of others, especially those who hate us. In 2007, in my rabbi's sermon on Yom Kippur, he said, the terrorist prisoners in Guantanamo Bay need better legal representation, and illegal immigrants need better health care. I walked out and never returned. In 2017, a Democratic friend of mine called me a racist for not attending a communal service at a mosque. That ended our friendship. When an article appeared in my synagogue newsletter about Jews of whiteness and Jews of color, I was greatly offended since I have an adopted Ethiopian Israeli son. What is this self-imposed segregation? I wrote a rebuttal article titled, Whiteness, the New Evil, which the editor censored and rejected. That article was later published in American Thinker. After several other incidences, I left the synagogue. Because we don't conform to Orwellian doublethink or Janus's groupthink, we are being censored, silenced, and squeezed out. When my article, The New Jewish Exodus, was also published in American Thinker, the response was overwhelming. It substantiated how encompassing this crisis really is. It has become like a cancer, metastasizing throughout all aspects of the Jewish community. God Sod also refers to a similar phenomenon in his book, The Parasitic Mind, and how a parasite can totally transform the thinking of its host to its own detriment. So let's see how this cancer manifests in the Jewish community. And thank you all for sharing your personal stories in the heartbreaking letters and newsletters you sent to me. I will now share 22 highlights from all around the United States. I selected those that were the most compelling examples of progressive bias, which compromise our Jewish values under their banner of Tikkun Olam. Shockingly, you will see how this progressive bias has not only affected those of us on the membership level, but also rabbis and heads of organizations whose reputations and personal safety have been suffered. Number one, this is a rabbi story about intimidation and censorship, and I quote, I created a program where I brought in speakers involved in academics, archaeology, diplomacy, policy, and military. An original event titled National Security Chaos had scheduled a general, a secretary of defense, and a congresswoman to speak. These speakers became the genesis for controversy and protest that took place in 2016 and brought the ire of a radical Muslim organization who intimidated the leadership at my synagogue and the local board of rabbis. Other Jews protested with Muslim and pro-Palestinian organizations outside my synagogue. These were public petitions condemning me, calling for me to be relieved of my contract, claiming that I was a racist, bigot, and worse. Condemnation by local and regional Jewish organizations, including the local Board of Rabbis. Even worse, the Southern Poverty Law Center designated the guest speakers as hate speakers, and me as the most hateful rabbi in America. Because of this, my family and I received death threats, and I had to hire private security to protect us, end of quote. Number 2. This is a woman's story about identity politics. After my 18-year membership in a conservative shul, I left because of alienation within my Jewish community. The Saturday Shabbos services, the bar mitzvah boys and girls, in their speeches, were spouting themes of social justice, in particular, gay marriage and homosexuality. A friend who regularly attended with her 10-year-old son objected. Her son knew nothing of these things, and she wanted to be the one to educate him on such matters, not some 13-year-old boy or girl. She asked the rabbi to advise her when the bar mitzvah speeches would include that topic, so she could keep her son home on those days. He refused, and even though he refused, he reviewed the speeches. Things escalated when the rabbi started talking about social justice. And on one Shabbos, the senior rabbi compared Obama to Moses. At that point, I was done, end of quote. Number 3, this is a member story about social justice, quote. Our conservative shul is totally focused on Black and Muslim Jewish outreach, BLM, racial equity, and helping Syrian immigrants. One of my rabbi's sermons celebrated Juneteenth and BLM, end of quote. Number 4. On Yom Kippur, a rabbi tells his congregation to stop buying Israel bonds, quote. I do not recall, as a conservative Jew, feeling this alienated from the Israel government, even during the infamous Who is a Jew controversy years back. What can we do to express our disappointment and anger at actions that call into question our very legitimacy as Jews in the eyes of the Jewish state? The board and I agreed we suspend our Israel bonds Yom Kippur appeal this year. Our other Reform and conservative synagogues will be taking similar steps, end of quote. The couple that sent this to me ended their membership. Number 5, from an alienated congregant, quote, my shul is dominated by social justice warriors who use tikkun olam to justify every liberal desire. I've been called a racist, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, and have locked horns with my rabbi on a number of things. Not because what I've said cannot be argued, but rather to shut me down. I've been shunned by everyone on my mother's side, who are all Democrats. Nobody ever initiates a call or an email. I am completely cut off, end of quote. Number 6. This is from the director of a major Jewish organization regarding censorship and being canceled, quote, this season, we were scheduled to hold our speakers' events at a prominent temple. 2 days before one major event, the director of the temple cancels our event because the speakers were discussing why Jews are worrying about their democratic roots, which dealt with anti-Semitism. Apparently, 4 progressive board members didn't approve of the speakers. They even got our congresswoman to send them a letter to cancel. At the last second, I was able to move the event to a country club, so we still proceeded after being canceled by the temple. Last year, the Jewish Federation divorced us in a vicious email to their staff. I was on the board of the JCC, which had been just taken over by the Federation. As a result of these actions, many have left the temple and stopped giving donations to the Federation and JCC. End of quote. Number 7, from a heartbroken congregant. Quote, with woke, leftist, intersectional, anti-Semitic politics now, the Social Justice Committee encourages our religious school children. Let me say that again, encourages our religious school children to attend immigration protests. I stopped attending Torah study when the New York Times 1619 project was presented as fact. The latest turn to anti-racism training was the last straw. I am incredibly sad. Judaism is no longer the religion of Reform Judaism. Leftism is. I refuse to be part of it. I am leaving my temple and Reform Judaism. I miss my friends, but to stay would be to bear false witness. End of quote. Number 8, from a frustrated mother, quote, the giant Black Lives Matter banner that takes over the front lawn of my synagogue is just the tip of the iceberg. I don't attend services anymore. Jewish liturgy has been replaced with the rabbi's social justice agenda. My 10th grade daughter was required to enroll in the Religious Action Center's Social Justice Academy. I want to repeat that again. My 10th grade daughter was required to enroll in the Religious Action Center's Social Justice Academy. The curriculum is completely comprised of left-sided propaganda. I find it a thinly veiled political indoctrination for teens who are vulnerable to influence. It has replaced the Jewish education that she was getting. I will not expose my younger daughter to that kind of environment, so she has missed half of her Jewish education this year. I want to see my daughters confirmed, but I won't have them negatively influenced in order to check that box. End of quote. Number 9, from a censored and canceled member, quote, the Hadassah group I belong to for 44 years told me I was no longer welcome to serve on the board. My sin was supporting Donald Trump and his policies regarding Israel. Their focus became BLM and the horrors of Trump, including his audacity to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I dropped out. Then my synagogue brought in a BDS organizer to explain their philosophy and purpose. At a book club, when I suggested we read Carolyn Glick, the response was anger and hostility. we could read books of condemning Israel, end of quote. Number 10, from a really annoyed couple, quote, 3 years ago, the focus of our rabbi's Yom Kippur sermon was to name victims of systematic racism by police without proof of racial bias. The punchline of the rabbi's sermon to the whole congregation was to declare all whites racist and accuse all the members of implicit racial bias, including himself. Many people walked out. Another of our rabbi's sermons advocated against restrictions against late-term abortion by justifying discussing politics in his sermons with his unbelievable admission, if not current issues that are often political. What then is a rabbi supposed to sermonize about? End of quote. How about Torah, Rabbi? Number 11, from a prominent Jewish leader, quote, in 2009, the rabbi at my Reformed temple chose to use his Yom Kippur sermon to tell the congregants that it was God's commandment to support Obamacare, which Obama asked him to do on his high holiday phone call. After the holiday, I entered into an email exchange with the rabbi, asking him where in the Bible God commanded the Jewish people to support universal health care. The conversation ended with my rabbi suggesting I find another religious home, end of quote. Number 12, from a rabbi who was canceled, quote, I watched how the reform movement, which had ordained me, began to move sharply left. Their emphasis was no longer on embracing Jewish practices and beliefs, a synonym for not for a Jewish understanding of justice, but for the political left agenda. A comment I made was misconstrued by a coworker who called me a bigot. When I tried to discuss her misunderstanding, she refused. She sent a vicious email to the board members distorting my comments. Because of the social justice mentality, my explanations were ignored. No justice. Even though I had been rabbi there for a very long time, I was canceled and relieved of my position teaching Jewish values that were not in sync with the prevailing political left orthodoxy, end of quote. Number 13, from a disenchanted couple, quote, my husband and I joined a racial justice group offered by our Reform synagogue. First, we were told common words like racism, bigotry, and bias had different meanings from those commonly held. The new definition of racism is only about white crimes against Blacks. We read a paper on racism and discussed our feelings. This was an indoctrination into critical race theory. Then the leader told me my feeling of being uncomfortable was a sign of my white superior attitude and good for me, because that meant I was on my way to becoming woke. We never returned to the group. I was appalled. This happened in my synagogue with my rabbi and people I knew, and that I was called a racist until I did the work to correct myself. End of quote. Number 14, from a very upset member, quote, support for Israel is apathetic at my synagogue. For a period of time, the prayer for Israel was dropped from the service without explanation. After complaints were made, an alternative version was added back. End of quote. I can't really imagine that. Number 15, from a rabbi who was canceled, quote, I'm a 30-year member of a Reformed temple and taught 6th grade classes on Jewish history, immigration, values, and the Holocaust for 20 years. Last year, I led a Zoom class for my students, approved and attended by the rabbi, director, and parents, in a political discussion requested by these students to challenge the one politically conservative person they knew, Donald Trump. Immediately after the Zoom meeting, I was fired, publicly labeled a racist for using the term Wuhan virus. I answered no, because that's where the virus seems to have originated. Another student complained about Fox News bias. I said there was bias in the mainstream news media. The rabbis told me I must apologize to the entire class or leave. I refused to back down when these students specifically requested my opinion. I was given no opportunity to defend myself. Both rabbis accused me of being a racist in a letter to the parents announcing my departure. I believe the temple slandered and defamed my reputation, and I want justice. End of quote. Number 16, a very upset congregant, quote, in 2017, our rabbi sat on a board with Linda Sarsour, a known anti-Semite. Then he gave a high holiday sermon accusing Israel of not treating Palestinians properly, lectured us on Islamophobia, white supremacy, racial justice, critical race theory, climate change, and voter suppression. End of quote. Number 17, this is my actual experience. When Jewish friends of mine protested Tamika Mallory, a known anti-Semite, speaking at the University of North Carolina, they were publicly criticized in an article in our synagogue newsletter. That same author then publicly apologized to the Black community that this shouldn't hurt relations. My friends ended their membership, and I miss them. Number 18, from an upset congregant, quote, during the riots last May, my rabbi's wife posted pictures of herself making lunch for the protesters and marking the bags with praise for BLM. During the rabbi's high holiday sermon, he reminded us that we are white racists. Number 19, from a frustrated grandfather. I was flipping through the prayer book and came across the following poem. Give us no gifts of weapons. Let us not feel triumph. Let us not rejoice in victory. We will fight, but lose. My children pulled my grandchildren out immediately. End of quote. Number 20, from a disappointed professor. Quote, as an adjunct professor at several colleges, I saw what Jewish students had to contend with on campus, and I am outraged that synagogues haven't taken up this cause rather than helping the stranger. American Jews care about Blacks, Hispanic immigrants, etc., but not about their fellow Jews. None of these groups or any other segment of our society cares about the Jewish community, as we are seeing now. Another horrifying experience was having to listen to a Rosh Hashanah sermon telling us to feel sympathy for the Palestinians on the heels of a suicide bombing in Jerusalem. End of quote. Number 21, from a puzzled congregant in a conservative synagogue, quote, I was shocked when my rabbi posted on Facebook, if any of my congregants voted for Trump, I am not their rabbi. End of quote. He got so much flack, he removed it. I wonder if they removed him. Number 22, from a very upset member, quote, during one Shabbos sermon, the rabbi spoke about the insurgents at the Capitol. Then the religious school students put on a presentation about modern day prophets, which included Biden, Harris, and Ginsburg. Needless to say, my head was exploding. End of quote. These stories leave me with one profound question. When did Judaism stop being Jewish? When it turned its back on its own. Rabbi Spero and I want to thank you for sharing your stories, which sadly profile the progressive mindset of 70% of the Jewish community. We believe this is an historical event commensurate to the political divisions, factions, and hate that divided the Jews during the destruction of the Second Temple. We will continue to document your stories as an historical perspective, and we will be creating an archive on the Conference of Jewish Affairs website, where these will be posted. I will oversee, so like today, your privacy will be protected. By coming together and acknowledging our strengths, we can resist the progressive takeover of our religion and get back what has been taken from us, our treasure, our Judaism. So what is the solution to this problem? For so many of us feel alienated and are without a religious affiliation. The solution is we will now have our own synagogue home and social venue. Our long-awaited existential community. We invite you to your new Synagogue of American home at the Conference of Jewish Affairs. Rabbi Aryeh Spero and I have put together a special program to bring us all together as one united Jewish family where we can celebrate our Judaism without the imposition of politics. We will provide an atmosphere of spiritual calmness, kindness, and camaraderie where we can devote ourselves to prayer, study, and open discussion, free of the dread of being censored, silenced, or canceled. First, Rabbi will perform a formal service twice a month. The service will include a Torah reading, Shema, a few songs, and Kaddish. Each service will have a new sermon for that week's parsha of the week. Because Rabbi Spero is Orthodox, the twice monthly sermon will not be done live on Saturday, but pre-recorded to be played any day our members wish, including Saturday. Second, besides the service and sermon, Rabbi plans to provide a class twice a month during weekdays, also on the parsha of the week. This will be live on Zoom. Following the class, we will have a general discussion about things of a Judaic nature. The discussion will be an open, live exchange on Zoom between all participants. Third, we have arranged a discussion group, a forum on the Conference of Jewish Affairs website. It is called the CJA, New Jewish Exodus Discussion Group. Please send your request to be a member to CJA, New Jewish Exodus Discussion Forum, to Conference of Jewish Affairs @gmail.com. Your request will thereby generate a formal invitation for membership, which you'll receive beginning early this week. Once invited, feel free to begin posting your comments and responding to others. If, as time goes on, there is a growing membership or call for more services and classes, Rabbi would certainly be amenable. If also there is a desire for added features and offerings, that too can be discussed. We can do holidays like Passover and Sukkot as well. Too bad we can't have a virtual Kiddush. We will also be posting a recording of today's event on the Conference of Jewish Affairs website, so you can watch it again or send it to your friends and family at conferenceofjewishaffairs.org. Many of you thought you were alone. Now you know you are a part of a unique and embracing community, kindred spirits with shared interests and values in preserving and taking back our Jewish heritage. We want to thank you all for attending this momentous turning point event. I would like to now introduce Rabbi Aryeh Spero, President of the Conference of Jewish Affairs, who has inspiring words to share with you in a closing prayer. After this, we will answer your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lauren, for sponsoring this call. And Adrienne, thank you for your yeoman's job, putting together all of these stories, the presentation, the idea, and hopefully, I'm sure that the seeds that you've planted here will blossom and will result in that which our community has needed now for a long time. All of the answers are not going to be found immediately, But I think a lot will be found through the discussions that we now have for the first time, a like-minded group of people who love the country, love these values of this country, the idea of free enterprise and personal responsibility, the ideas of liberty, love Israel. And now we come together and we start to cross-fertilize. We'll come up with ideas, but what we have already from the get-go is a commitment that we are not going to take this any longer. Those days are over. We understand that many of the temples and synagogues have become indoctrination centers. They've become Judenrein for conservative Jews. And they're trying to present to us and to our children an absolutely false idea of Judaism. Judaism is not about wokeness. Judaism is not about tikkun olam for every other cause that social engineers the world and takes away freedom and has no respect for people on their own to know what's good for themselves, their children, and their family. So what we do start out with is a lack of timidity. We are going to make sure that we, which is about 25%, maybe 30% of the Jewish community that still have common sense, that we will act together with confidence, boldly. We are what I consider the she'erita pleita. In Hebrew, that means the saving remnant. The saving remnant for Judaism here in America is going to come from this group. Israel is its own entity, but in America, if we don't at this point, and that's going to be the purpose of the Conference of Jewish Affairs. We've been around for quite a while, but it's Adrienne's idea here that is inviting a lot of people to become part of this. We cannot allow the institutions, be they the synagogues, the temples, or the federations, we cannot allow them to define Judaism when we know that Judaism is far more, far better, and far different. No longer can these people have that monopoly. So we'll do that through the Conference of Jewish Affairs. I invite you to go to the discussion group that will start tomorrow, the new Jewish Exodus discussion group on the Conference of Jewish Affairs, where, first of all, people will have a chance to vent and tell their stories, a little bit of a catharsis, because I understand a lot of people are sad. This is tragic to be basically canceled by your synagogue. But beyond that, there has to be a certain sense of self-righteous anger. You know, God implanted in human all of these emotions. As Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon said, there is a time for love, there's a time for anger. There's a time for peace, there's a time for war. This is a time for us to have a certain self-righteous anger. We have been gypped by our institutions, and they're trying to take away the minds and the souls of our children. And we are going to fight this. We'll do this through Conference of Jewish Affairs. We're not afraid. We do believe in all of these things. What we will also have through the Synagogue of America, which you'll find on the Conference of Jewish Affairs, at least a chance for people who during the week or on Shabbat, though I'll have to record this beforehand because I am Orthodox. And one of the advantages of Orthodoxy is most of us have not capitulated to this false wokeness, this phony social justice, which is not social justice, it's socialism, because we still do believe in the written word. And we know that the plan of Judaism is written in the Torah, the Bible itself. We will have in Synagogue of America services. Now, it cannot replace some of the specialness of being in a live, physical brick and mortar synagogue where you actually shake hands with people, but we will create our own existential community. It won't be limited to one locale, but it will exist wherever we exist and we come together. And during this service, there will be a prayer for the state of Israel, proudly, a prayer for the United States of America, proudly. There will be a prayer for those among us who are healing and they need tefillah, they need prayer. There will be a Kaddish, there will be Yortzeit recognitions, there will be a drasha, a sermon. There will be the taking out of the Torah, the returning of the Torah. There will be Adon Olam, there'll be cantorials. And I think that we'll put together, we have a little sample for people that we'll begin sending out, something that will be uplifting, and it will relieve us of having to go to a synagogue or temple that we now find very uncomfortable. Beyond that, of course, with these discussions, people will be able to tell other people in their cities, if it's Philadelphia, like was mentioned, or if it's in another town where there might happen to be a synagogue where they are friendly and where it's not Judenrein for conservative politically Jews. So we're going to start all of these things. If you want to visit the website, that's www.conferenceofjewishaffairs.org. It's an org. If you want to enter into the discussion group, then you go to the email, not the website. And the email is conferenceofjewishaffairs@gmail.com. We cannot, on this phone call, give solutions to all the problems. But this is a great beginning. You know, the Revolutionary War here in the United States was not supported by most Americans. You have a handful of people who are activists, who believe, they have a commitment, they have a fire and a passion. And they can, with that and intelligence, they can move mountains and create wonderful, wonderful new structures. So we're doing this not to change all these temples that are already the way they are. That's a foregone conclusion. They're not going to change. Leftism is their religion. Leftism is their life. So far is this leftism their life that they're even willing to tear asunder families. It's not we conservatives who break up the family in the name of politics. We have never told someone in our family that they're not welcome because they're leftists or they vote for Biden or they voted for Obama, as detestable as it is to me. We've never excluded them from family events, but we have had our family members, and I've heard this from so many families, of people on the left, once they hear that you voted for Trump or that you're a Republican or you're a conservative, they exclude you. You're out. This is what I call the strange devotion, the strange worship, the avodah zarah that the Torah talks about with moral relativism. So I want to thank Adrienne, I want to thank Lauren, and for all of us that are here. We don't at this point have all the answers, but we have one direction, and that is we're going to fight, not in the temples. Maybe a few people would like to do that. We're going to fight from outside. As we get together, maybe people will have ideas in their own locales how they fight for their own particular temple, but at least we'll also provide people with a spiritual experience, with classes, with discussions, and we'll form this fraternity, our own community. We are the She'erit HaPleita, the saving remnant, and a new community hopefully is started here today. Shalom, shalom. What I am going to do, first I would like to send a piece that I wrote in Times of Israel precisely about Tikkun Olam, what Tikkun Olam is and what it is not. But I can tell you what is being called Tikkun Olam across most of the Reform temples, many of the conservative synagogues, the federations, that is not Tikkun Olam. That's just a social engineering and ensconcing it with some type of fancy language that makes it seem that it's authentically Jewish. It's not. That's not Tikkun Olam. Actually, Tikkun Olam more so is like we see in Olenu, the Takin Olam b'Malchut Shaddai, is to notify the world that there is a God. And what is a God? A God is one who gives us guidance to make our life more productive and fruitful and blessed. And that includes many of the limitations that he put for us in the Torah that are for our own benefit. So I'm going to send that out. Secondly, I'm not trying to promote my book. I do have a book called Pushback, which talks about reviving the battle for our Judeo-Christian heritage. Now, of course, we aren't Christian, but the Judeo-Christian heritage is just a nice name for a biblical heritage, most of it being the Old Testament. In that book, I do address issues that have to do with compassion, tolerance, love, inclusivity, immigration, social justice. I don't have in that book all of the issues that we've seen now in the last year with this explosion of new definitions of what it means to be woke. I'll have something about that, but I wrote the book a few years ago. But if you give me your address, we'll send you a book. And it's not a book, though, that just goes through exclusively from a Jewish point of view. Okay, here's an issue. Immigration, where are all the halachic understandings? Next, it's an overview. What is it? What is the Old Testament view of personal responsibility? Because that's what it all boils down to, versus blaming society for everything and giving certain minorities, quote unquote, minorities, a free pass. So you can, and it's rather honest. What I have not written, Ed, is a book is why Jews are acting the way they are today in America. I'm not going to write a book simply that says, well, we're always for the underdog and we're so compassionate and whoever we consider weaker, that's who we support. That might have been 60 years ago. Today, the Jewish community is involved in hardcore radical politics to transform America and to make it socialist. With many of these Jewish people, social engineering it. It has nothing to do with compassion, because I don't see them having compassion for the regular blue-collar worker whose job is being taken from him and being sent to China. And so I will send you that book. And but I'm available if you ever want, or any of you, I can talk to you and tell you what is the particular biblical or halachic position. And I have to tell you, it cannot be simply the endless repeating from the prophet Micah that be humble and do justice. We all believe in justice. You don't need Micah for that. It's in the Torah itself. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, pursue justice. But what the left wing does as false prophets is justice means left wing ideas of justice, which is not equality, but equity. It's not opportunity, but an end result. It's not what the American Revolution was about, but more what the French Revolution was about. So we can discuss all these things. Right now, of course, there is no precise book answering every idea of wokeness because it's so new. It's happening every day, something new. That's the problem, Ed, with wokeness. In order to keep being able to call you a racist, every time you move along and accept the conduct, the new conduct, well, they come up with a new definition of racism so they can keep pointing a finger at you and keeping you under control by saying you're a racist. So try the book Pushback. If you give me your number, your address, we'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Wars now, my friends, for about, it's hard to say, but it's 45 years, because I started as a congregational rabbi when I was about 23, 24, 25. And so I've been involved in these wars for 45 years. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. As a matter of fact, all the reasons that were told to me 50 years ago why Jewish people have to feel outside of society, the more these reasons crumble, because they're not outside. They're in the highest positions of corporations, banks, Wall Street, television, media, academia. My goodness, the White House. If it's Trump's White House or if it's Obama's White House, the people negotiating the deal in Iran to hurt Israel, they're all Jewish, just about all of them. So I've been in these wars for 45 years. You're not going to change the overall majority of the Jewish community. We're living in the same times. Always look back at the Tanakh. We're looking at the same time, same idea of not just the Hellenism that we're familiar with, but in the times of Achav, Ahab, and Jezebel, that even the rabbis were false prophets and teaching moral relativism. They were teaching their version of multiculturalism, that everything is okay, every culture is equal, every God is equal. We're in that period here with American Jewry. What they've developed is what I call not Judaism, but it's an American Jewishness. And the Jewishness is far, far removed from Judaism. So I've been through that fight for 45 years. I don't think we're going to win it unless there's something so cataclysmic beyond arguments and beyond logic. We're not going to win it with logic because it's emotional. The reason Jews are left-wing is these are emotional reasons. For some, it's that they think that their security lies in coalescing with every single minority group because they look at themselves as a minority. So they think that their strength is with partnering up with the Muslims and with the Blacks and with the Hispanics and with the LGBTQ and every group that considers itself outside, intersectionality. It's emotional. It's not going to be won over by logic. Some of it has to do with arrogance, Jews thinking that they know best how to social engineer. It's not going to be won by logic because we're fighting emotion. So though I like to talk about it, that's not where I'm going to put my energy now. I'm going to put my energy in providing a home for the 25, maybe 30% of the Jewish people who still have common sense and still put Jewish and American interests first, not the interests of intersectionality. They need a home. They need our energies. We have to create that community. That's going to take a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy, and a lot of brains. So that's where my fight will go. When it comes to your local, I'm a big believer that a lot of it on a secular level, it's the local, as it should be. That's how the founding fathers envisioned our country. That's what's meant by federalism. Not that there's a strong federal government, but their power resides with the people in their locality. So in your locality, absolutely run for school board. I'm involved where I live with all these candidates, and my wife is involved with all the candidates running for the school board to protect the souls of our children, that they shouldn't be overwhelmed by all this wokeness and having LGBTQ shoved down the ears of the children as if to say that this is normal, it's something to aspire to. So do that, of course. On the secular level, the American level, I'm for fighting with ideas, because I think we can win, because most of the American people by nature are conservative. They have reverence for the Bible, the values in the Bible, about personal responsibility. There, I believe very much in fighting. As far as the Jewish community itself, I don't believe any longer. Don't say you shouldn't do it, but that's where my energies are not going to go into that fight. I've done that for almost a half a century. I want to now fight for those who are on our side, who believe like us, who have been canceled within the synagogues and who have made to believe that they're not Jewish, when in fact, just the opposite, they represent Jewish. That's where I'm going to devote myself. But on the American level, absolutely, conservative ideas, biblically based, will prevail, because America, unlike the Jewish community, is a very conservative community. Most Jews, unfortunately, do believe in the whole concept of class struggle. Most Americans don't. They believe first and foremost the idea of free speech, free assembly, self-defense, things of that nature in the Bill of Rights. Most Jews, what they're enamored with is the concept of the class struggle, which is a Marxist ideology. It's in their blood. As you mentioned, it goes back to the Frankfurt School. It goes back to Russia, the revolution. So it's harder to sway Jews because they're very much into class struggle, which then became economic struggle, racial struggle, gender struggle. I would fight on my local level, and in the Jewish community, I want to save the She'erita Plata, 25 and 30% who are entitled to a fraternity and a part of this like-minded group. They are not necessarily biblical Sinai-believing people, but they share your values. This community is not based on being Orthodox. I just happen to be Orthodox. But I talk about, because I'm involved in the secular community, quite often I talk about it not with a biblical foundation, but simply an American historical Western civilization foundation. So I think that you'll get some comfort being with like-minded people who share your values. And when you eventually go into Conference of Jewish Affairs at gmail.com and you enter the discussion group about this, that's part of the cross-fertilization of ideas. Everyone's going to share. Oh, you're going to North Carolina, Florida, Oklahoma, New York. These are the synagogues that are safe. We can also use the word safe space. That's great. That's part of the group. All of the people are members, participants in the group when they're traveling or they're in a town to find out from other people, because we're a well-traveled community. Where's a very good synagogue where you can go and feel comfortable and not be canceled and not have to hear a sermon about woke culture?
Thank you all again for attending this unique event, and we hope to see you at the Conference of Jewish Affairs. God bless.
Adrienne, you did a great job. Thank you so much. I know you prepared long and hard to be able to make this very moving presentation for us. I'd like to thank the audience for coming and joining us today. Of course, Adrienne for a spectacular presentation, Rabbi Spero, and Julia Schmidt. Thank you, everyone, and Shavua Tov.